what I would start with, and we were talking about a little biographical information, and I would start with the fact that as a kid I was very sensitive. And I think you'll hear a lot of spiritual teachers say that they came in with a lot of sensitivity. And that sensitivity blended with the kind of the chaos that I saw, in my own family and in the world. And I think of my early, 4 or 5 years old, these images of Richard Nixon on TV, the Vietnam War. What I knew, in a sense, what I knew to be true, which was a kind of a state of peace and a state of joy and a state of true being, seemed nothing like what I saw in the world. And ultimately, over time, although I think I would have some, mystic experiences where I reconnected to that being, and I reconnected to that greater sense of feeling oneness or connected with all of reality, I came into being, what we call an ego self. When the ego self, just very simply, it would be really hard to get a definition, getting 10 people in a room to agree on a definition. But ego is essentially a self-representation. It is the imagination of ourself. And it's an important development. But when we take that to be the ground of who we are, it's a very shaky ground. So this is fast-forwarding way into the future of my life, but what became really important to me was how to integrate what I had early intimations of, and then later great big blasts of senses of the beauty of the reality of being, the beauty of truth, the beauty of the whole of life. How to integrate that with the fact that I was just this kind of guy that was rolling around and had needs and wants and conflicts with people. How to make sense of that as a human being. So rather than just transcending my humanness, actually embodying my humanness as, we could say, living spirit, or I could throw a lot of different words out there at it. Some will resonate with people, some won't. But what's important is that there's something bigger, more fundamental, more profound than the way that we normally experience ourselves in life.
Tell me, you said you had early intimations as a child. Mm-hmm. You had to develop tools over time to get in touch with those things again. Did you lose them at some point? Or did you your ego self was trying to push them away and be something you weren't, just to fit in, and then you ended up seeking the spiritual path and making it out west? Tell me somewhat about that transition from the intimation all the way to your path of seeking out teachers and different modalities of spiritual development.
Well, I think I essentially... Well, first of all, let me just say that we go through phases of development, and I think that anybody who's really interested in seeing a very clear model of the phases of development that we go through would want to read Ken Wilber. I won't go into Wilber's teaching here, but I'll give you an example. At a certain age, in teenage life, I became really in love with Christianity and really in love with Jesus. And because of my stage of development, and where most teenagers are at that time, I took it to be very much about rules and how I behaved and how I didn't behave. And I took, probably a fairly strong view on heaven and hell, that those things existed. And I took a lot of the kind of prevailing dogma in with that. So I was still having some connection with the experience, but now it was colored by my phase of development as a human being. As I got older and older, I became more and more unhappy with Christianity and what I saw. You know, at the time we had the Jerry Falwell, and we had the one guy who was crying on TV. I can't remember his name now. Jimmy Swaggart.
Okay.
He had a big scandal, and he was a great big.
Was it a sex scandal?
It was a sex.
It was
an
a sex scandal
on TV. Yeah,
Okay.
he had a great big crying, and you know, and what I started to see of Christianity just didn't seem to have anything to do with what I felt were the core teachings of Jesus. You know,
Right.
Love your enemy. Where's that?
Right.
How do you do? Well, you know, and I had my own dysfunctional ego, and it didn't seem to be that I could try to live and be a person in the world and be consistent with any of those teachings that I found really true and profound. So in a way, I left that, and I was quite disillusioned for quite a few years.
You just left the church life completely and dropped all of it, or did you still, were you almost like a heretical Christian for a while, or did you just dropped it all?
Well, honestly, I wasn't part of the church for that long. I had some relationship with the church, but my Christianity was more my own relationship with the Bible and what I would read.
Right.
But I became very angry, and I'll tell you, in my 20s, there was a point at which I wore an upside down cross in protest. So I was pretty pissed off,
Right.
you know, about how the hypocrisy of Christianity.
So Jesus Christ was pissed off about the hypocrisy of Judaism.
Yeah, he wasn't too pleased about the Pharisees.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So, I was an angry young man, you know, and I was into angry music, and I was, which I think, thinking back on that time, I think some of the music that came along was actually really healing, in that I wasn't hearing anybody talking about these deep, dark, unhappy states, you know, and I remember feeling empty and depressed and feeling, you know, this awareness of death, this daily awareness of death that I felt like nobody seemed to have or care about or talk about. And it really puzzled me and it bothered me.
So you had this deep, profound angst. I think many people who made it through their teenage years can relate. But you kept pushing the boundaries. How did you go from, what was the stage of studying the Bible to, did you begin to study other traditions and begin to see similarities between them? Or you were seeking out tools to feel better? I'm interested in this progression. And
well, I was, you know, I was in my middle 20s, and I was living in Concord, California, just the suburbs. And I was hanging out a lot in Oakland and hanging out with some people that were more countercultural. And a friend of mine turned me on to the Jerry Brown's radio show at the time.
Explain that a little bit. I haven't heard of that.
Well, Jerry Brown was on KPFA, which is a very, very left-wing radio station. And he had a show called We the People, and he's an amazing talker. It was an interview show, so he would interview, you know, everybody from Buddhist monks to environmental activists.
Okay.
I think he had Noam Chomsky on.
Yeah.
And even at one point, I remember Jerry referring to himself as a Chomskyan anarchist.
Okay. All right. I think Chomsky refers to himself as a socialist libertarian. That takes a while to wrap your head around that. Like, what? How's that work?
So my friend calls me up one day. He says, I've been volunteering down at Jerry Brown's office and for this We the People movement. Jerry was in between his political activities then, and he thought that he was going to build he did build he took a downtown Oakland, right next to the Amtrak in Oakland, a downtown warehouse, great big warehouse, and he converted it into what he was thinking of as an urban monastery. And he took this building, and the bottom floor of the building was sectioned off into kind of dining area and cooking space, and then there was a library, and then there was work area for this kind of enlightened urban movement that he was envisioning happening. He was going to start food co-ops in Oakland. He was, he wanted to bring the best and brightest minds in and start a movement on a grassroots urban level. The top floor of the building was all little monk-style quarters. Some of them had bathrooms, some of them didn't. But his idea was that everyone would come in, that he wanted to come in and would live in a room, take a stipend, and they would all work for this greater cause. It had an auditorium, like a 10,000 square foot auditorium, or maybe it was bigger, but and we'd have events. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So my friend says, come down here. I'm volunteering for Jerry Brown. Just come down to the building. And after a couple of weeks, I gave it a try. I went and I rang the buzzer of the building, and the door pulls open and Jerry Brown's standing there. And I was pretty blown away. There was just a moment where there was a moment of resonance with this human being. And I felt like I had landed on, or I had just boarded the Enlightenment spaceship.
Okay. People were making sense.
Yes, and very much he was making sense. His radio show, I began to listen to his radio show daily, and I ended up being on his staff as one of 2 paid employees of his staff. The whole thing never really panned out. I won't get into all the reasons of that, but I had an amazing experience there. I met magazine publishers and movie stars and Buddhist monks, and then we put on events for all these different people. We had we had an event for the Redwood Summer that they had up here back in like 97 or whenever it was, 96 maybe it was. So I started, first of all, interacting day to day a lot with Jerry and learning just from him. And I started, my mind really started to open to these new ideas and to these new people, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Dalai Lama.
So it was fundamentally a spiritual movement and trying to bring those spiritual principles out into the world with like the food co-ops and intentional living. Is that how you define it? Spiritual
but political, trying to kind of be integrative actually, spiritually, politically, and Jerry had a lot of clout. This is before he ended up running for mayor of Oakland. I don't know if you know that. He was mayor for 2 terms and then back to governor, of course.
Okay.
He had a lot of clout, so he was able to draw a lot of people in.
Did he have like a magnetic, charismatic vibe to him?
He was very magnetic and charismatic. Okay. I've never seen anybody speak like him. He could go up to a lectern and he never had notes. He never thought about his talk. And he'd start shifting back between one foot and the other, and he'd start kind of rubbing his head and rubbing his face a little bit. And it looked like he just wasn't going to come up with anything. And then something would turn on, and he would just give the most potent speech you'd ever heard for whatever, 20 minutes, 45, an hour. He was brilliant. He is brilliant. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
How long were you there?
I was there for 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you engaged in any sort of meditation practice, or what were you getting into? You were having all sorts of awesome conversations, meeting all sorts of awesome people. Your mind is expanding.
Yeah. Well, Jerry Brown had met Dorothy Day, who was you might know Dorothy Day. She was the founder, I believe, of the Catholic Workers, or one of the instrumental people.
Okay. The name is familiar.
Yeah. And he had asked her, and of course Jerry had ended up going and living in India with Mother Teresa as well for a while. But Jerry asked Dorothy Day, how do I expand myself? Who do I read? Where should I go? And she told him to read Martin Buber,
okay,
who was a Hasidic mystic who wrote the book I Am Thou. So he, one of the things that he did there is he had a Martin Buber book group. We all sat in on. There was probably, a dozen or 15 of us in this Martin Buber book group, and we studied Martin Buber. And interestingly enough, it's pretty fundamental and basic for anybody that's been in spirituality for a while, but nobody seemed to make heads or tails of this book.
Really?
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Well, that's what those books are good for. It just gets the wheels spinning. What's he talking about there?
Yeah.
And then you just kind of sends you off on that thought for a while.
My dad is I think, a bit of a mystic, and I gave him the book one time to read, and he picked up and read a couple paragraphs of it and basically fed it right back to me exactly what it was. This was years later, when I actually understood what the book was.
Okay. But
I think it was indicative of the fact that there was a bunch of really unresolved egos there that hadn't had a taste. There's a Wilbur book called One Taste.
Okay.
And until you have that taste,
yeah.
until you have that one taste, you live in a kind of a virtual reality.
A virtual daydream.
Yeah.
That's not of your own creation.
A living dream.
A trance state.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing I'm very interested in is finding ways to facilitate people to have that taste.
Was there any drug use?
I did see mushrooms as a powerful teacher of mine in my 20s.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Very, very much gratitude for my experience on mushrooms.
Are you up to date on some of the research that's going on?
The MAPS stuff.
Yeah, MAPS, Johns Hopkins. Just a lot of end-of-life transition stuff, which makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're using it for combat veterans yet. They've been using MDMA for combat veterans to deal with PTSD.
Sure, you got MDMA, you got ketamine, you got the ayahuasca that people are doing.
Also, they're showing addiction. People are able to break addiction habits.
Yeah, I believe that Iboga is, at least as far as I've heard, very powerful in breaking addiction.
Right.
Yeah.
I've watched some documentaries on YouTube, but that's about it.
Yeah. So I think those things have their place. I think without some practice and some guidance, particularly some guidance with those powerful drugs, I think you can spin pretty far off into the weeds.
And it's probably not. They all say set and setting's good. The place to do it is probably not in high school or something like that. Or at a festival. I don't know.
No, I agree, and I think that we've taken. My friend who's in an ayahuasca tradition tells me that ayahuasca is a powerful medicine, but the most powerful medicine they have in this particular tribe is tobacco.
Really?
Yeah.
I know that's part of the ayahuasca ceremony. They start with that.
And some of them, I think. But some of them, tobacco is the medicine. Yeah. And I think when we take these medicines and we use them in a materialistic way, I think they poison us, and or we become addicted, or they make us sick. Yeah.
I was talking to one of my friends, and he had experience in a lot of these realms. He was saying that ayahuasca could turn on you. It was one of the. He was talking about trying to put psychedelics in a hierarchy, and saying that ayahuasca would be one of the lower ones, and maybe I'll get him on the podcast at one point so he can explain that further. But it's interesting realms and territories.
Well, I think depending on your chemical makeup and depending on the makeup of your psyche, how you're put together, people really harm themselves with psychedelics. So And it's pretty serious business.
Right.
Yeah.
Should not be taken lightly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have a teacher or a guide?
No, I didn't. But I did have, I'll tell you, the first time I ever did psychedelics was my dad took me up on a mountaintop when I was 14 because I wanted to do acid. And we went up to the top of a mountain, and he gave me a quarter hit of blotter acid. And I actually disappeared. I mean, I literally disappeared. Everything disappeared.
Okay, so you hit like a 0 point. Explain that to me as someone who would have never done acid. Someone who doesn't have that. Like you're identifying with nothingness.
No, I disappeared.
You disappeared.
Everything disappeared. Okay. So what happened is that I disappeared, and I had this little contraption in my hand. It was made of just a screw together contraption. And I had it in my hand, and I disappeared. And when I came back, it was all taken apart in my hands. I never knew much what to make of it. I could probably, make something of it now.
So was your dad? I mean, that's really cultures lack, or American culture lacks, like an initiation for the youth.
Yeah,
I think in some cultures.
Yeah,
that's an interesting initiation. That
you got Michael Meade and Malidoma Somé, and of course, some others talking about that stuff. If people are interested in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are those authors?
Yeah, Michael Meade.
Okay.
Man and the Water of Life. Malidoma Somé is a tribesman from Africa that's come over, and he's been leading groups for probably 30 years in this country.
A Sangoma, like a shaman type.
Maybe, I'm not positive about it. Yeah, but anyway, so that's the initiation. Yeah. So anyway, that was an initiation.
Okay. So you have that knowledge of that realm, and you experienced it with your father, so it felt safe-ish.
Yeah, it was safe.
Guardian was with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
We were on the mountain.
So you didn't necessarily get into mushrooms by yourself. You were exploring an area you had some knowledge of, but you're also probably pushing the limits because that's just what humans do.
Yeah, I tried different things. I tried a lot of different things.
Yeah.
So, but we could get off in the margins in that, I think.
Right. Well, let's keep marching forward. Maybe that'll be another conversation.
So anyway, I did experience the mushrooms. I thought that was a powerful teacher. Ultimately, it was time to leave Jerry Brown. He was going to run for mayor, and that wasn't my interest and where I had any talent in political campaigns. So I really wanted to do something that was of value, that meant something that was important. And so I was a bicycle rider, and I had seen this group called Bike Aid, which was like Live Aid. They had those kind of things at the time. And they would do this charity bike ride from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. And the charity, what you would do is everybody raised money, but we raised money for all these micro charities, which was pretty new at the time. And there were charities like, a village in Africa needed a well,
right,
or
like attainable goals, things that were within grasp.
Yeah. So I did this ride, and which was a pretty hard ride. And the hardest thing about the ride was, living out of a bus, out of a van,
right,
and riding bicycles across the country with 24 other people in my group. And after this ride, I came home, and I did it. I think it was for my 30th birthday. And I came home, and I felt like something should have happened. I'd done this great thing for myself. I had done something that I felt was really important, of value, and I came home, and nothing had really changed. In fact, things felt worse to me. And I fell into a lot of despair. And my life pretty much fell apart after that. I had a nice place in the Oakland Hills, and, a partner of 9 years and a couple of dogs, and it just all evaporated. It all disintegrated. And that's actually about the time I moved to Humboldt.
Okay.
You know. So I moved to Humboldt. I'm with a new person, a new partner, and that wasn't working out. It was clear that that wasn't going to go very well. So then I'm off to Heartwood Institute, the massage institute, and I'm cooking up there. And I started to get some interest in meditation. I went to a Tibetan meditation, then I went to a Goenka Vipassana meditation. And I started to feel like, well, first of all, I had profound experiences in those meditations, and there were retreats.
Do you want to go into some of those experiences, or keep cruising?
Probably cruise through those, but they were life-shaking.
Really?
You know, the first 5-day Tibetan retreat where we were doing mantras and chants and a green Tara initiation, and then I experienced a sense of reality as if everything was a dream.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the Vipassana, which is a very hard retreat at that time to do that 10-day retreat with Goenka.
10 days, no talking.
10 days, no talking.
6 a.m. to like 9 p.m.
Very
discipline.
Very much 4:30 a.m. until until 10, I think. But yeah, and I was very serious about it, and it was incredibly profound to me. You know, and I felt like I found the well of truth.
Okay. So you're just by nature a seeker, and that was like your beacon.
I have a truth compass.
There. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I have a truth compass, I think. Yeah, which some people do and some people don't. And I don't know why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, were you able to carry those experiences out with you into the world? Did you continue down that path, or was that what set you about your integration?
Yeah, I think, I could see that some things were shifting for me, but they certainly weren't shifting fast enough for me. And so I kind of redoubled my efforts, and I had bought, coincidentally, I had bought this little pop-up camper. And when I left Heartwood and the relationship from that period ultimately broke up, I took off in this little camper, and I just decided I was just going to go everywhere that I could possibly go to see spiritual teachers, to go to meditation retreats, and I was going to dedicate my life to that. I ended up living at Spirit Rock Meditation Center, which is just down in Marin. It's a beautiful, a bit more of a gentle style of Vipassana meditation. And Jack Kornfield was one of the people that started it.
I'm familiar with him.
Yeah. And I lived there, for about 6 months, and I got a lot out of it. I did some deep retreats. I did a couple longer 2-week retreats. I did. Previous to that, I had done 3 weeks out in the woods by myself. But there was still something I felt like, here I was within this Buddhist community, but I felt like this sense of people being kind of repressed. Like that, I could sense this beautiful, like I was on the lip, I was tasting this ecstasy, of life. And I was tasting it through the meditation, through my time in nature. And I wouldn't listen to music, or I would just, I didn't do anything. I didn't, I had some books and things, but I didn't engage in any media. I didn't read newspapers. I just really devoted myself to this meditation and to being in nature. That was really important. And about that time, I ran into some non-dual teachers. First I saw Gangaji, and then as soon as I started to see her, my life it was like the lid came off.
Okay. Explain how she would facilitate that. You were obviously right for it.
I would listen to her talks. They were like just recorded, audio recordings that I could get, little 8-10 minute snippets on the web. listen to these talks, and I would feel these incredible inner sensations, inner experiences. I would go into these kind of states, and at one point, I remember feeling this state as if I was like a kind of a murky, muddy pond, and somebody was just dredging and pulling up debris out of the top, as if they was pulling up through my chakras and out of the top of my head and just out of me.
That's like the Kundalini language experience almost.
Yeah, and so I started to have, I started to read about Kundalini and get really interested in that, and I still had a very Vipassana, Theravada, Buddhist orientation of like, whatever's happening, just let it be, don't mess with it, don't get engaged with it, don't get stuck in it. So I would just kind of sit back and witness all of these different states and experiences that were happening to me. And I went on my first weekend retreat with Gangaji, and I had an intuition to fast, which I'd never fasted. I just had this sudden intuition to fast. And I fasted for 5 days. And at the end of this weekend workshop that she was doing, this weekend intensive they called them, I decided I was going to raise my hand. And you may have heard this story on the back app and review it. I decided I was going to raise my hand, and it was the final session. And suddenly I was just beset with this terror. Before I raised my hand, I was beset with this terror that I was going to lose my mind, I was going to go crazy and attack her, and people would be pulling me off, and something crazy was going to come out of me. But I raised it anyway, and I went up, and I sat, not too much farther than we're sitting, just a couple feet away from her, and I looked into her eyes, and I felt this, it was almost like a Star Trek materialization field, but it was this beam of energy that went from the top of my head down through all of my body and down through my feet. And I heard this kind of ringing, this ringing with it. And every bit of tension in my body that I held, and I could see that it was the personality, the self, every bit of tension that I associated with the feeling of self was gone. And I was there in this rarefied moment with this person, and there was just total equality.
That's it. That's a beautiful experience.
Yeah. And she wasn't some great master, and I wasn't some this or that. It was just this moment of pure equality. And it was so beautiful. And then we had an exchange, and...
Do you remember what you asked her? Or were you like, I'm having a weird experience. Can you help me?
I was so blown away, at the time, that she ended up telling me about, she ended up saying, have you ever seen a movie called Wings of Desire? And I said, no. She said, you need to see it. She said, it's a movie about people who are here that aren't from here, that aren't from this realm, but drop into this realm. And so...
Do you think she was one of those avatars?
I think we all have something going on. And I think that sometimes when the channel of what we are gets blown open, that can be transmitted in a very powerful way. So maybe she's an avatar, maybe, I still don't put a lot. I'm still very cautious of the cult of personality.
Right.
Yeah. So, although I did, basically go to everything that she did for the next few years, and then
she helped you.
Yes, she did.
I mean, the proof is in the pudding.
Yes, she did, and there's a very powerful transmission in the field. And what I mean by transmission is there's a very palpable feeling of having your mind stilled and quieted, a sense of immense, profound, solid presence, and a sense of like kind of purity and clarity, that happens within some of those, what they would call satsang, or satsanga, with these teachers. I think Ram Dass one time, and I got to see him. I didn't mention that I met Ram Dass with my dad when I was 8 years old. But we were talking about him, I think, before the interview here. But I got to see Ram Dass one time, and he said a lot of these teachers that are going around nowadays that are being called gurus are actually, I think he said mediums, or maybe that wasn't the word, but they're kind of channels for an energy. So they're just people, but there's a particular energy that comes through that can be profoundly, affecting of others.
I've heard consciousness describe different planes of consciousness, and there's planes of consciousness that touch like divinity. Does that make any connection there for you? Like, if someone's in touch or channeling a certain realm of consciousness that is higher or rarefied, or they're a medium for that.
Yes, and I think it goes right back to our point about integration, because I think there are people that are that, and I think there are people that can awaken you by being in their presence, and they aren't necessarily people that are that good for you, or good for one. Yeah. I think that, it's in all of us. It's not just in some people. And so what happens is that these people and the people around them form a kind of a collusion in which it's believed that it's singular to that person.
Yeah, it's a cult. The teacher should be getting everyone on their level, or ideally getting them to exceed them.
Well,
does that make sense?
It makes a certain amount of sense, but the teachers got their shit too,
right?
And so part of their shit is that everybody starts running around kissing their feet, and all of a sudden, they're liking it.
Right.
People are making their meals and cleaning their houses, and they're liking that. So, so then there's another trap,
So you have this transmission. You would call that a taste? That was a taste you had of something new.
No, that was more than a taste.
Okay.
That was actually an experience of liberation. That was a profound samadhi, or a profound I forget what they call it in Zen, but satori.
Satori.
Yeah.
And were you able to hold on to that? Or was your Vipassana side of you saying, "Oh, that's a thing"?
Well, there was that. That's a thing. Just watch it. But because I did have that orientation. But now this idea of holding on to something is an interesting idea, because who's holding on to what?
Right.
That's an important question, actually, as we kind of deepen into the conversation. Is what is it that you are? What is it that you think? See, for me to hold on to something means I have a representation of who I am, and something else is happening, and so something is happening to me. But in a unitive experience, actually, there's just a total experience happening.
Right.
Yeah. So I would say, I was very connected to that. I was profoundly connected to a lot of joy, a lot of bliss, a lot of heart opening. There were tears. There was, I was experiencing a very bhakti phase, a very devotional phase of my awakening.
Were you had believed in God at this point?
I didn't believe in God in the man in the sky God, but I believed that there was something. I never stopped believing there was something more. Yeah.
Well, that gets into the different realms. There's something going on behind the scenes. Not that someone's steering it, or there's more.
Yeah, I believed in some kind of total, dynamic, intelligent, living force that animated everything.
Chi or prana.
Sure,
like that.
Sure, but maybe deeper than that. Maybe like with the intelligence. With the field of intelligence in it. So something.
Okay.
Something more of that nature.
So you have this experience, and you have to go back out into the world of
Right. Well, I have
keeping gas in your gas tank,
Unfortunately,
dealing with other humans that aren't at that level.
Fortunately, I had a few years worth of money saved up,
Okay.
and I was able to really go around and, go to different retreats and go to different teachers because I wanted to test this awakening. So then I met Adyashanti, who you may have heard of, who's really an immaculate non-dual teacher. These are non-dual teachers now that I'm talking of. So
Can you explain non-dual?
yeah, non-dual is, the path of Vipassana is kind of like start meditating, start following Buddha's rules. You will gradually burn through your karma, and if you're really serious about it, you'll become a monk. And, who knows, maybe in a couple hundred lifetimes you'll attain liberation.
Okay.
The non-dual path is more the direct path, more of a certain school of Zen. But the non-dual path says you already are awake. Just turn to that awakeness, realize the awareness that you are. Know that, rest in that, stop there, and you are awakened.
Sounds better than 200 lifetimes.
And it works. There are teachers that transmit that.
Okay. And obviously with powerful results.
With very powerful results. Yeah.
So you had another 2 years after that experience of bouncing from teacher to meditation to...
I was very devoted to Gangaji for a few years, but when she wasn't doing anything, I would go check out any other teacher that I could. And there was tons coming up in the Bay Area at the time. I ended up spending a lot of time in Santa Cruz and, that area. Living in my camper.
Right. And blissing out on nature and... walking in the grass barefooted. I was down in San Diego one time in such ecstasy that I just felt like, my skin was gonna turn into gold or something. It was, yeah. I wish everyone could taste that or live that. It's hard to interact with people that aren't on that plane.
And that's what I started to see. You seem deluded, you seem weird, you seem scary.
Right.
Yeah.
We just don't... The West, there's no place really for that in Western culture as it is today.
Yeah, and part of integrating is to be able to know that experience, that is an aspect or possibility of experience, but to be able to relate to people on a personal level. And that's where the diamond approach comes in. That's where I began to be very interested in the diamond approach.
Okay. We discussed this earlier off the recording.
Yeah.
Can you explain the diamond approach? Is this, and why, from your perspective, it just made sense to you?
Well, at first it didn't make sense. It seemed like way too many words.
Okay.
It seemed like way too much information. It seemed like kind of almost dogmatic when you had a teacher just saying, just come to this point of peace, which I'm transmitting to you right now. Rest there, stop, do not move.
Okay.
And then suddenly you have the diamond approach and it's saying, work that psychological material.
Okay.
The psychological material is what keeps you from experiencing your spiritual nature. They're not separate. You can have peak experiences, as Ken Wilber says, you get a peak of a spiritual experience, but you can't have those experiences as a station that are available anytime that it's appropriate. If you haven't worked through the particular aspects of the personality that need to be worked through in order for you to embody those states of being. And the diamond approach is very comprehensive. So the multifaceted aspects of the diamond, it's very clear, it's very direct, it's very penetrating of our experience. And what it is even though some of the non-dual direct paths are called inquiry, this is a kind of inquiry that's a bit different. It's an inquiry, an investigation into the present moment experience that reveals that any experience, maybe one of the primary insights of the diamond approach is that any experience, when penetrated in essentially a tantric way, by going deep in, turning back to the experience, feeling, experiencing, understanding that experience, will lead you to a deeper dimension of your being. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
It's I'd like to meditate on that for a while before I'd be able to grasp more of it. So what does that look like? Give me a thought process
Sure.
of being in an experience and trying to go deeper.
Well, first, and this is what is really useful in having meditation, because you learn to focus your mind. And then second, in having the direct approach, because you learn to make direct contact with your experience rather than thinking about it. You know, it's kind of some of these teachers, they kind of lop your head off.
Okay.
So what would happen, for instance, is say that we're dealing with anger. Let's say that anger is coming up a lot for you, and you start to go, okay, I'm mad about this thing that happened, I'm mad at this person or this situation. But what is this anger? What's really going on here? What is the experience of anger? And then we come back into the experience, and we can use our breath, we can use a contact with the chair and the seat, kind of really start to come into a deeper contact with our body, with our feeling sense, and begin to feel what anger is. Dropping our ideas about anger, our right or wrong, dropping concepts of anger, feel the experience of anger. And we might notice that there's a kind of a agitated energy in our body, maybe some heat. Notice some expansion, the breath increasing, the pulse becoming more rapid. And you might notice some other things. Some things might happen psychologically. And I won't take you through necessarily a whole long deep process of it, but you might start to notice that as you make direct contact with the anger, not conceptual contact, you're not thinking about it, but you're feeling it in your body, in your energy. You're willing to be present to it. It starts to change. It starts to bring a sense of strength and groundedness, a sense of energy, a sense of expansion, a sense of precision and clarity. And if you're getting there with that, you're dropping into a dimension of being. You're dropping, you talked about levels or dimensions, you're dropping into a dimension of, in Diamond Heart we call it strength, the strength dimension, or the red essence. And that red essence is something that we need to initiate, to take action, to confront, to get moving in our lives, to do the things that we need to do. Some people can get in touch with that pretty quickly. Some people, it can take years of work, psychologically. And I'll say culturally right now, because of the way that women have been brought up in this culture, it can be very hard for women to experience their strength because it's very taboo to experience anger. So that's an example.
Okay. I was meditating along with you as you were speaking, and I could sense there's a power to it. Like anything, any new perspective you have to an experience or an idea or concept, including going beyond ideas and concepts, has a power to it that just makes you more aware. So
you felt something there.
Oh, certainly. I'm not a man that's prone to anger, but I do get worked up. So I was able to work through some of that while you were speaking. So that was great.
Yeah.
So, like that type of exercise, you're integrating your aspects of your personality with your spirit. Is that?
Yeah, you're basically digesting your personality.
Okay.
That's a process. It's essentially a process of digestion.
Okay.
Anytime that you say, wait a minute, I'm having a reactivity, or I'm having something is unclear here, or my heart is blocked. Anytime you say that and you turn back, rather than start looking for, fixes in the world or blaming people or whatever the situation is, and that you start to turn back, you're starting to digest that experience. Like you're asking, what is this experience? What's true here?
Digesting is it's a loaded word. Or like processing it, dissolving it, or just
transforming it.
Yeah,
okay. Transmuting it.
Okay.
Yeah. That's transmutation for you.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
And you found this through, was there a book for it? The Diamond Approach?
There is a canon.
A canon of books.
Of books from the Diamond Approach. The first book is called Essence. Maybe the most useful book to start with is called Diamond Heart Book 1.
Okay.
And he continues to write books. He continues to lead a school. It's a very elaborated spiritual teaching.
Okay.
Yeah. And he synthesizes Buddhism, different types of Buddhism, Sufism, Christianity. He understands the place of all of those, and he's able to synthesize and compare. Is one of the most brilliant spiritual minds, I think, that's probably lived in this, in the last 100 years, I'm sure.
Okay, and say his name for them.
His name is A.H. Almas, or that's the pen name, A.H. and then A.L.M.A.A.S.
Okay, I'll for sure put this book in the show notes.
Okay, yeah.
And how did this book find you? Was it one of those synchronistic experiences that you can be participate in?
It was, but it was something I resisted. I'd heard that Jack Kornfield and some of these guys had all gone through the Diamond Approach, or all students of the Diamond Approach, along with being Buddhist teachers and whatnot. So this was like a teacher's path, a teacher's teaching in a sense. And I remember going to the Santa Cruz library and picking out a couple Diamond Approach books, and some of it sounded really great, and some of it I just had no idea what the hell he was talking about, which isn't usually the case for me in books. But.
Plus, you had some resistance to dogma in general.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, at the time, because I was very interested in the direct approach, and at the time I was rejecting of the gradual approach.
You were seeking liberation, and liberation doesn't like rules. Or neither does spirit, I would say.
Well, and I read things like, Nisargadatta's I Am That, which is a very powerful book, and he says, find this, stick with it, and don't believe anything anybody else says.
Okay.
And so we can get, and that's a good example of how then, we talked about strength a minute ago. Another dimension that needs to be cleared in the Diamond Approach is will. Because false will comes out as a kind of a stubbornness. It's not flexible and coherent. It's stubborn and it's rigid. So, I applied my false will to some of these teachings, and that became a block to where I needed to go next. So that's another dimension that needs to be understood, for instance.
Okay, so we've got strength, we've got will. What are different realms that
those are like what we might call more belly qualities. Then we have heart qualities like joy, love, compassion. Then we have head qualities like brilliancy and guidance, inner guidance,
intuition.
Okay. Yeah.
That word keeps coming up in the spiritual conversations I'm having.
Yeah.
Follow your intuition, just trust the process, and that seems to be true in your own journey.
Yeah, I think intuition. Everything, and this is part of why I don't like dogma, because everything when it's taken as a dogma is going to it has a half-life.
Okay.
So with intuition is incredibly important, and if you are not connected with it at all, it's incredibly important to develop it and open it. But we need discrimination. So we could say intuition maybe is more in the heart as well, the heart and the belly, and we need the discrimination of the head center to be able to, do the math, so to speak. Does this stand up? Is this true?
Yeah.
Checks and balances.
It's easy to think you got it and run with it.
Yeah.
And that's where people get in trouble.
Yeah, and sometimes it's pretty easy to check it out,
What do you mean, check it out?
Well, say for instance you come to the intuition that you're an enlightened avatar.
Right.
You just ask your wife.
Yeah.
Does she think so?
Ask your parents or your boss.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, our intuition needs a check.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly valuable. Yeah.
So you decided to follow the teacher's path?
I did, and by this time I was already seeing clients in Santa Cruz. I had an office in Santa Cruz, and I had a background in body work, so I was very interested in how we hold ourselves in the body, particularly given that experience of seeing the complete relief of self as a total relaxation of all tension in the body. So I was very interested in that, and I continue to work with body work as well as one-on-one talking sessions and presence sessions with people in Santa Cruz. And then moving back up here, I came more a bit less into the body work and more into doing these one-on-one sessions with people, as well as the workshops, sometimes the retreats, and doing the retreats and the workshops with Christine Fiorentino, my partner, who's also a yoga teacher who was at Om Shala. Yeah.
And you get clients. How are you finding these clients? You're advertising. That's how I found you. I saw a flyer you had around town.
Yeah, we've been doing this here for quite a few years now. So there's flyers, and for those who see those, there's also most of my clients are word of mouth now.
Okay.
Yeah, or people that have come to a workshop, but those people are word of mouth too now. So.
And these are people working on the integration experience that have turned the corner and are trying to come back.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah, not necessarily. Some of the people I work with feel that they've had awakenings.
Are you able to identify like where people are at?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that kind of heightened perception is you can actually kind of get a sense of where people are, where they might be stuck, what the work is that they need to be doing, and some people have a lot more embedded trauma in their systems. Some people, some people just don't have as much ego strength or ego health. And actually we would think, well, maybe that's good. It'll be easier to get rid of the ego. but it actually makes for a less stable platform to become embodied. You know?
I would agree with that.
So, go ahead.
Trauma. I'm a combat veteran, so I've been around watching the lives unfold of all my friends. And then, I think a lot of military type people are like lemmings, should we say, and may not have the strongest of personality development, and that's why they seek, or why they gravitate towards those realms, because they think, once I got the uniform on, that's what I am.
Yeah, and you could compare the military path to a martial arts path, or certain Zen schools even, in which they really focus on the development of the will and the strength elements of the human being. And mostly it is kind of, they develop it through the use of the false will and the false strength, the kind of the distorted strength and this distorted will. But because it's so focused on that, they actually, a lot of people that stay with that for a while will develop some real strength and real will, and can come off as very clear, strong human beings. Doesn't mean they develop their hearts or their minds necessarily, but that's a warrior's path.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm always interested in healing modalities, especially in that realm. There's just so much that can go wrong, or that gets buried, really. Like, you're in combat and you have missions.
Yeah.
Maybe someone dies one night. All right, it happened. We got a mission in the morning.
Yeah.
All right, where's the time to process?
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, so, I think you're talking about something where we run the gamut from being incredibly sensitive beings to very coarse. We can make our consciousness and even our bodies very coarse. When you make them very coarse, ultimately they break down after a while, the consciousness and the body. I think maybe the key factor is that the more eggs we put in the basket of being a body, a separate physical body, and nothing else, the more we lose trust that there's a deeper reality that has intelligence and dynamism and even love. And as and that can become chronically wired into the body with trauma, or even with, being in a modality like the military or something. It can be really hard to penetrate. People can get armored up for life and have a hard time ever breaking through that armor to the delicacy of the spiritual being.
Right. Do you ever look at spirituality through the realm of evolutionary biology?
I don't.
Okay.
It sounds like
maybe with all of that. Yeah. I just didn't know if that was something that was out there necessarily.
It's out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just seems like you see spiritual movements. A lot of times they go towards like evolution of consciousness for the species. Like, if you look at Herald of a New Age, like Jesus came in.
Yeah.
He, all the Old Testament stuff is gone. All those rules are gone. This is like a new step up in consciousness.
Yes.
And there's all these, Jerry, the movement you were working on, there's just all these steps and progressions.
Yeah, and I brought up Ken Wilber earlier, and he's beautiful in this.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I need to check him out. You're the second person that's brought him up in the conversation.
You'll love Ken Wilber because he puts this together like nobody ever has.
Okay.
Yeah. I think what I do really specifically, what I do is I help people to wake up and live that awakening.
Okay.
And so I don't go too far. I mean, I may have my particular interests or conversations, but I don't go too far into speculative stuff.
Okay.
Because what I'm really interested in is what's it going to take for you here now to live your truth and to be truth. And that's where my passion is.
Okay.
It's passion for myself.
What's the power that you see of a world of people living their truth?
Well, see, there is speculation again in there. It's okay.
You're
fine.
living it in your life.
What's that?
You're living it in your life, so you should have some.
Well, I live it in my
example
life, and I have
of-
my challenges, and I think the kind of omnipotent, omnipresent, powerful, mistake-free idealizations that people can have. I'm not saying you have this, but that people can have around spirituality ultimately really get in the way of accepting ourselves as these kind of bumbling animals with imaginations.
Sniveling, farting animals.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I mean, you go see a spiritual master, remember, they have to sit on the pot.
Right.
At some point they're going to leave that gathering and have to take a dump,
Right.
So there's something, we all will lose people that we love. We all will face probably some kind of diseases or disabilities in our life, or the people that we love. We'll have to care for people that do. We'll live in a world where people aren't kind to each other, and sometimes, no matter how much spirituality we have, we don't have it in us to be kind to certain people or loving. So I think, the embodiment thing really, it comes back to what one of the things we often start with in the diamond approach work is the superego, the inner critic and the inner judge. And it really requires us to learn how to get that monkey off our back of the judgment, the criticism, the idealization, and accept ourselves where we are, be kind to ourselves where we are, and realize that we have areas that we're, maybe tremendously talented and illuminated in, and there's other areas there's always learning, there's always work to do.
And growing.
Yeah.
I would say that the Roman Catholic, particularly, that's my experience, that teaching that the spiritual lessons you get in that school of thought they support that critical thinking, because you're watching yourself, but you're shamefully watching yourself and all your mistakes.
Yeah.
So it's like they program you to have that experience, and it's one of those things you have to. Like my mom she's like, I just want to be good so I can go to heaven.
Yeah.
She's always watching herself and being judgmental. I mean, it helps her make decisions that are maybe for her higher self, but at the end of the day, she's ultimately living in fear.
Yeah, and that's her level of reality.
Right.
And I think as you become more sensitive, that becomes painful to you when you see the pain in that, because that is a form of violence. It's a form of violence against our animal impulses. It's a form of violence against our imagination.
Just the trauma of everyday life.
The trauma of everyday life.
Right.
Part of which is that we abuse ourselves. We pick on ourselves. Yeah.
There is value in that, though. Like, it spurs you towards growth and discipline, and might get you to the point where you discipline yourself to a specific path that could lead to liberation or getting that taste.
I would say that there may be phase-specific value. So, we develop the superego, and it comes kind of pretty strongly into our consciousness early on, 2, 3, and then it gets pretty strong. You could see these, 8, 9, 10-year-olds start getting pretty bossy and pretty pretty litigious about rules and stuff. I think so. What happens is that it becomes kind of pathologic in us. We don't become liberated from it, and we live. Our value starts to depend on that judgment, which is arbitrary depending on our culture and depending on our parents and our upbringing. I'm all for discrimination. I'm all for true conscience. But what I've seen, and the best that I know, is that the superego works by devaluing a person for where they're at. It's a rejection of where you are and an idealization or a standard for where you should be. And it's really, for some people it can be a very debilitating loop. For some people it can be kind of the normal mode of operating. But if we're talking about liberation, or we're talking about freedom, that's one of the first and primary obstacles to start working with. And I do a lot of work with that, with my clients.
Yeah, it just seems like that's day one programming type stuff right out the gate. That's, like you said, start developing it early, and it's how people go through life naturally.
Yeah. And
or you think it's culturally as well, or?
Well, I mean, the way that it's formed is part cultural. I don't know how superego looks across cultures. I think it's anyone that has a Ten Commandments type law has superego.
Okay.
The Ten Commandments is kind of representative of superego.
Okay.
I think that's what Jesus was saying. So let's live by love, and let's not live by all these laws. Let's live by love and our true heart and our true compassion and our true conscience. Yeah, that's when he brought up that. I love that he said that, because I think that why didn't they throw out the Hebrew scriptures and just stay with the New Testament, the Gospels?
People are still clinging. You'll see Old Testament signs
outside
of like rallies, like anti-gay ones.
Yeah.
And I always thought it'd be funny to have an anti-shrimp sign, like, because there's I think there's more references in the Old Testament that you shouldn't have, like mollusks and seafood, than there are to you shouldn't lay with a man, and just have like that sign right next to someone else.
Yeah, really, that's a good one. Yeah,
just a way to use irony to deflate someone's.
Yeah. So what you're talking about too has a real element to it, because we're living with people who are living in primitive states. It is like we live in different realms. And if you're exploring this kind of stuff and I'm exploring this kind of stuff, we're exploring dimensions, expanded dimensions of what it is to be a human being. We're titrating the divine into our humanity, which is a good way of looking at embodiment.
Living a life of love, is that spirit? Is that like your beacon, where you just like let go and just start being through non-being? And if you're living in love,
what does it feel like as you're talking about it?
It feels good. Yeah, but I don't know if it'll pay the bills.
Yeah, well,
feed me.
I think that's what happens is our ideas of love are still wrapped up in the kind of infantile relationship with mom.
Right.
Which is this kind of oceanic, loving, good, oral, experience.
It gets into Freud and Stanislav Grof, the word oceanic.
Okay.
He's a transpersonal psychologist.
Yeah, Stan Grof.
Yeah, he would say that.
Yeah, so then we start to see, okay, well, you're feeling this feeling of love, right? But there are these impressions inside of you that tell you what love is. First of all, you just said, well, I wouldn't get anything done, or something to that effect, right? Well, that's our impression, is that if we just live in this bubble of loving sweetness, what we remember is being babies.
Okay.
And so we immediately have that impression.
It feels like regressive, almost.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have that experience, but it has the imprints in us that get activated or regressive. So we need to work with those imprints, start to liberate those imprints, see where they come from. This is kind of the psychological aspect of it. And then also say, well, what is it about being open and joyful and loving and a bubble of love that means you can't have your strength in your will? Because then we start to see these things are conflicted.
Right. I still have that warrior spirit. So it's hard to, if I go love, I'm going love. It's on my list for 2018.
Which is?
Explore intimacy and relationship. And open up. So that's good. It's kind of funny that that's where the conversation has led to. So you're giving people tools to...
I always cringe a little bit at the tools because I'm like, I don't know, where are these tools that everybody's talking about?
Yeah, you're not wearing a tool belt or anything. Modalities, is that?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's just, you're just giving them experiences, or you're facilitating. Yeah, you're a teacher at a different level than.
What I would hope is that I'm able to embody the qualities of presence that are needed in the individual that sits with me, or even in the group to a sense. If that's true, that's a transmittable thing, a quality of being. They call it a transmission, is a transmittable thing. That's not infallible, but what I also have is an understanding of what, I have my intuitive sense and my sense of contact with the other person in terms of what they're working with and what they might need. Mm-hmm. But I have an understanding of some of the blocks that you're going to encounter along the way, to say opening your heart and living,
right.
having your strength, but not in a hard and, as we men, for instance, not in a hard and penetrating way,
right.
but having a loving strength. So I can see some of those things that a person might need to work on in that arena. But finally, the most important thing is that the work that I do with people is teaching them how to be attuned to their own guidance about these things, so that they can actually, to use the word penetrate again, penetrate what's going on in the moment with them to enter into the state of what's needed, which is each of these states of being, whether it's a state of strength or compassion or brilliancy, each of these states of being are the resolution to the psychological blocks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you seen or experienced any spiritual states where people could be pathologized or institutionalized, or do you deal with people that are suffering spiritually, going through a spiritual emergency or crisis?
I would say yes. I mean, the majority of the people I work with are not going through major spiritual crises. There can be a lot of stuff thrown up. I think there is a newer understanding. You said you were talking to Sarah, and she brought up Bessel van der Kolk and Peter Levine. I think even beyond what Groff has done, there's more understanding of trauma now, and we can understand how some of these experiences bring up trauma. Sometimes you can have a spiritual experience that can destabilize your structure, your egoic structure, to a point where a lot of trauma comes out, or even a lot of somatic stuff starts to happen.
And it manifests on the material plane to give you an indication that something's amiss. Like that's how I've been processing certain aspects.
Yeah, that's one level. I mean, there's all these different kind of dimensions and levels. It's kind of like you just pull a lens over, a VR lens or something.
Okay.
So you pull the lens of mythology, the kind of mythopoetic lens over, that would be like Michael Meade, who I was talking to you about, and Joe Campbell, and some of that stuff. There's the lens of Theravada and Buddhism and all the rules and the ways that they look at the ways that they number things and tell you about why everything arises and what it is. There's the lens of relationship. Working with somebody in a relationship. That's actually attending in the relationship. There's a lens, for instance, of movement, like yoga and dance, and you're actually just talk about modality. You're just moving into this other way of investigating your experience. All these different things, and no one way has the one truth.
Yeah, that's where it kind of comes into seeing what resonates with you and shopping around for those experiences. Is that?
I think so. I think too, you need to find something and stick with it. I think that's important. You need to have a little triangulation with whatever you're doing, because people that find something and stick with it can often be missing something else too. So I think we have the opportunity not to be, I forget the word, not to dilettantes about it, but to do a couple different things, but put some intention and some, really plan yourself into it.
Let's talk about being and being. Is that once you're acting from a root place of selfhood?
Yeah. So look, we could use, the thing is different words resonate with different people. So I can say being, you say being, I have a certain particular feeling association.
Okay.
Or we could say God, or we could say true nature, some people say, or Buddha nature, or Dharmakaya, or these different things, or the Atman, or so being. Other people might say spirit, for instance, and I think the important thing is that just to the bottom line is there is a dimension of us where everything's okay. There could be a lot of neat stuff happening in that dimension, or you could be very quiet with that and just pulling weeds in the garden, But there's a dimension of being where things are just okay. The ways that we're programmed are okay. The way the world is, and its dysfunction is okay. Our sadness about that is okay. Being is a knowing of something, of a deeper ground that holds everything and that is not separate from anything. And you might feel it as we're talking about it.
Right. Is that comes out of knowledge of the absolute?
Good, you got the absolute. Some people are going to have experiences of the absolute. That experience I talked about doing LSD and disappearing, that's one kind of experience of the absolute. That's so absolute, just like when you go under with anesthesia. That's so absolute, there's nothing.
Right.
Now, I will say that, interestingly enough, somehow when you've had that experience, you can experience, a person can experience that everything is totally happening right now, and there's nothing at all. So everything is totally happening, everything we're talking, the sounds, the sights, and there's absolutely nothing. So it's like you're feeling the two sides of the coin at once. Everything and nothing. And so there's a certain sense of what happens, I think, when the absolute penetrates your reality. Different traditions have a little bit different variations on what the absolute is, too, so that might be a footnote.
That seems like that should be resolved.
Well, it only seems like it should be resolved if you think that things should have an ultimate. Ultimate, right?
Maybe that's the Roman Catholic
right. Well, it's
roots in me.
It's very, well, it's not just you. I think that we all want to have kind of the ultimate final boom. That's it, right? But what if everything was just always totally dynamic? And what if everything was a fountain that erupted from nothing?
You're speaking like a Taoist right now.
Right.
And that's change is constant.
Yeah. So there's just, that's one thing I wanted to say, is that there's just so many different kinds of awakenings. There's so many different kinds of realizations, and like some people have one and they're going to gun for that.
Right.
They're going to put their tent stake down on that and pound that. They come and go, they're beautiful, and they inform us in different times, but there's just so many different ways to have realization. And it's good stuff. It's what's worth living for.
Yeah, it's human. It's the human experience.
Yeah.
And we're here to be experiencing life and figure out what we are and what selfhood, and try to embody that. And
hopefully enjoy it a little bit if we can.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a good lesson and a reminder there. How do you, people listen to this conversation and they're interested in perhaps meeting with you, how can they find you?
Well, I'm sure you'll put it on your site,
yes.
But our website is beingrealnow.org. I don't put a lot of attention to the website, but you can get our information there. And I work in private sessions. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love my work, and I work in 75 to 90-minute sessions. And I see people regularly over time. So I work with people who really want to develop themselves, not people who want to have a one-off experience. We do workshops together, Christine and I. We do retreats sporadically, and sometimes we do some private retreats. And there's other opportunities. Once in a while we'll do a small group gathering and do some group process work. So there's a lot of different things we do and we offer.
Excellent. I will put the website in the show notes so people can find you.
Cool.
And do you have anything coming up the next month or 2 or 3 months that I should put on there as well?
Right now we're pretty clear slate. We have a Lost Coast retreat that we'll do in September. We hike 25 people 8.5 miles from Shelter Cove up to the Lost Coast, up to a place called Big Flat, and it's a surf camp there, and we have a yoga and meditation retreat there. But it's also just to really enjoy a one-of-a-kind place out in the wilderness.
That sounds great. Thank you for your time.
Yeah,
I've enjoyed being here with you.
Yeah. It's been good to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me into your home.
Yeah, and I just really, I really encourage you and on your journey, and there is just fall in your heart.